My son slid a loan guarantee across my kitchen table and told me to sign it or I would never hold my grandson again. $500,000. That was the price he put on my love. What he did not know was that 30 years ago, a machine on the assembly line took something from me. Something invisible. Something that would turn his forged check into a confession and send his whole world crashing down. Welcome to the story. If this kind of family drama speaks to you, like the video, subscribe, and tell us your location in the comments. And just so you know, parts of this story include fictionalized elements added for storytelling and reflection. Any resemblance to real individuals or places is coincidental. But the truth behind the message remains unchanged. The silence in my row house was thick enough to chew. It was the kind of silence that seeps into old brick walls when a man has lived alone too long, when the only voice he hears is the ticking of a clock his dead wife wound every Sunday morning for 40 years. I sat at the dining table with my hands folded over the cloth Dorothy used to iron with starch and lavender water. The clock on the wall above the kitchen doorway ticked its steady rhythm. 7:52 in the evening. They were almost an hour late. On the table sat a pot roast I had started at dawn. 9 hours of slow cooking. The way Dorothy taught me before her hands grew too tired to hold the pan. Mashed potatoes going cold in the ceramic bowl she painted at that little shop in Fells Point the year Miles was born. Green beans with the bacon crumbles she always said made them taste like home. I had set 3 places. Mine at the head, Terrence and Kristen on either side, and in the center of the table, propped against the pepper mill, a framed photograph of Dorothy. Tonight was 9 years since her heart gave out. 9 years since I held her hand in that hospital room and promised her I would keep this family together. I adjusted my tinted glasses out of habit. The world through my lenses was the same as it had always been since 1998. Shades of gray, light, and dark. No color. The doctors called it complete achromatopsia. A machine on the General Motors assembly line in Dundalk had malfunctioned, and the hydraulic arm swung back and caught me across the temple. I woke up 3 days later in Johns Hopkins with perfect vision except for one thing. The color was gone. Every shade, every hue, every tint wiped clean like chalk from a blackboard. I learned to live with it. I learned to read by contrast, to navigate by shape and shadow. I never complained. I wore the tinted glasses because bright light hurt my eyes now, and because I did not want people to pity me. Most people forgot. My own son forgot. I looked at the Snap-on tool set sitting on the shelf by the door. 38 years of service at General Motors, and they gave me that chrome box with my name engraved on the lid. Eugene Carter. 38 years of precision. It was the only trophy I ever needed. I had built engines that outlasted marriages. I had calibrated machines to tolerances thinner than a human hair. Precision was not just my job. It was my religion. Headlights swept across the front window at 8:43. I did not feel relief. I felt the old tightness in my chest, the same pressure I used to feel before the foreman called a mandatory overtime shift. Something was wrong. I could feel it the way an old mechanic feels a misfire before the engine light comes on. The front door opened without a knock. Terrence walked in first. My boy was 35 years old, 6 feet tall, wearing a charcoal suit that cost more than my monthly pension check. But his shoulders were hunched forward like a man carrying a weight he could not name. His eyes darted around the room, scanning the old furniture, the worn carpet, the shelves of Dorothy's porcelain birds. He looked like he was cataloging the poverty, measuring it against whatever life he was pretending to live outside these walls. Behind him came Kristen. My daughter-in-law stepped across the threshold like she was crossing a contaminated zone. She was a slim woman with sharp cheekbones and auburn hair pulled tight against her scalp. Her eyes swept the room with the efficiency of an appraiser calculating demolition value. She did not say hello. She did not look at Dorothy's photograph. She wrinkled her nose and muttered something about the smell of old cooking oil. They did not apologize for being late. They did not comment on the food. They did not acknowledge the anniversary or the empty chair where Dorothy should have been sitting. They sat down across from each other, and the air in the room shifted from warm to cold in the space of a breath. I reached for the carving knife. I was about to ask about Miles, my grandson, even though I knew they would not bring a 7-year-old to Hampton after dark. But before the question left my mouth, Kristen reached into her leather bag. She pulled out a blue folder, thick and heavy with the weight of legal paper. She dropped it onto the table. It landed next to Dorothy's photograph with a thud that rattled the silverware against the porcelain plates. "We are not here for dinner, Eugene," Kristen said. Her voice was flat and precise, like a scalpel cutting through small talk. "We have business." I put the knife down slowly. I looked at Terrence. He was staring at his own hands, picking at a cuticle. He would not meet my eyes. "What is this?" I asked. "Open it," Kristen said. She tapped a manicured fingernail against the blue cover. 3 sharp clicks like a metronome setting the tempo for what came next. "This is our future. And yours if you decide to finally do something useful with all that money you have been hoarding in this little house." I opened the folder. I put on my reading glasses, the high-contrast pair I kept for fine print, and looked down at the first page. It was a loan guarantee agreement. The property address was in Harbor East. The purchase price made my breath catch. $1.3 million. I turned the page. Monthly payment estimated at $9,200. And there at the bottom, on the signature line marked guarantor, someone had already typed my full name. Eugene Raymond Carter. I looked up. Terrence was finally looking at me. His eyes were wet. His jaw was clenched tight enough to crack teeth. $500,000, Kristen said, leaning forward with her elbows on Dorothy's tablecloth. "That is all we need from you, Eugene. Sign the guarantee, and everyone is happy." I looked at the numbers on the page. 1.3 million. I looked at Terrence. He made $62,000 a year managing a warehouse for a shipping company in Curtis Bay. Kristen had not held a job since the wedding. She called herself an interior design consultant. But the only interior she ever designed was the illusion of wealth around my son. "Terrence," I said, keeping my voice low and even, "you cannot afford a $9,000 mortgage. You know that. I know that. The bank knows that. That is why they need a guarantor. They need someone to bleed when you cannot pay." Terrence opened his mouth, but Kristen cut him off with a sharp wave of her hand. She did not even look at him. Her eyes stayed locked on mine. "That is where your pension comes in, Eugene. You are sitting on over $2 million in retirement accounts. You live in this crumbling row house. You drive a truck older than your grandson. You eat alone every night. What exactly are you saving for? To be the richest man in the cemetery?" I felt the heat rise from my collar to my ears. It was not anger yet. It was the cold recognition that my son had opened my financial life to this woman, like a filing cabinet left unlocked. He had told her the numbers. He had handed her the ammunition. "This is my pension," I said. "I earned it. 38 years on an assembly line breathing metal dust and hydraulic fluid. Dorothy and I saved every spare dollar so we would never be a burden, so we would never need to beg. I will not sign a guarantee I know you cannot honor." Kristen let out a laugh that had no warmth in it. It was a sound like a wrench dropped on concrete. She stood up and walked around the table until she was standing over me. I could smell her perfume, something sharp and expensive that clashed with the honest smell of pot roast and old wood. "Let me explain something to you, Eugene." She spoke slowly. "The way people speak to children or to old men they have already decided are stupid. We are not asking. We are offering you an opportunity to finally matter in your grandson's life, to provide something beyond rusty toy cars and stories about the factory floor." I pushed my chair back and stood up. The pain in my knees meant nothing compared to the fire building in my chest. I would not be spoken to like the help in my own home. In the home I built with my own hands. In the home where Dorothy died. I said no, I repeated. My voice came out harder than I intended. like iron dragged across iron. No guarantee, no cosign, no $500,000. If you want a house, buy one you can afford. That is what your mother and I did. That is what honest people do. The room went quiet. The clock ticked. Dorothy's photograph stared at us from the center of the table, frozen in that gentle smile she wore in every picture. I wondered what she would say if she could see what her son had become. I wondered if she already knew. Wherever she was, Terrence slammed both palms flat on the table. The plates jumped. A glass of water tipped and spilled across the tablecloth. Dorothy had ironed for Sundays. His face was twisted, contorted by something between rage and shame. "You owe me," he shouted. His voice cracked on the last word like a teenager's. "You were never there. You were always at that stupid factory. You missed everything. My games. My graduation. You owe me a life, Dad. You owe me the life you never gave me." I looked at my son. I saw the boy who used to sit on the garage floor, handing me wrenches while I rebuilt a carburetor on Saturday mornings. I saw the teenager who stopped coming to the garage. I saw the young man who stopped calling. And I saw the stranger standing in front of me now, wearing a suit he could not afford, married to a woman who treated him like a puppet, screaming at his father because he was too afraid to scream at his wife. I did not owe him a childhood. I gave him one. I gave him every overtime dollar, every holiday shift, every missed meal, so he could go to that school in Roland Park, where he was the only brown face in the class photo. He did not know what I sacrificed. He did not remember because he never had to. Before I could speak, Kristen grabbed the folder from the table. She stuffed it back into her bag with sharp, violent movements. She turned to Terrence and grabbed his arm, pulling him toward the door like a handler pulling a dog from a fight. Then she stopped. She turned back to me. Her face was calm now, perfectly composed. And that scared me more than the shouting. "Let me be clear, Eugene," she said. Her voice was soft, almost gentle, almost caring. "If you do not sign these papers by Sunday evening, you will never see Miles again. I will remove your name from the school. I will tell his teachers you are unstable. I will tell the court you are a danger. Miles will grow up thinking his grandfather is dead. And eventually, for him, you will be." She held my gaze for 3 full seconds. Then she smiled. A thin, bloodless smile that never reached her eyes. She turned and walked out the door. Terrence followed without looking back. He did not say goodbye. He did not look at Dorothy's picture. He just followed his wife into the darkness like a man walking off the edge of a cliff he could not see. The door slammed. The frame shook. Dorothy's photograph rattled against the table. The pot roast sat cold and untouched in the center of the table, growing a skin of congealed fat. I stood alone in my dining room, listening to their car engine fade down the street. I sat back down. My hands were trembling. I reached for the amber bottle of heart medication on the counter and shook out a pill. I swallowed it dry. The bitterness coated my throat. They wanted to use my grandson as a hostage. They wanted to ransom my love for a signature on a piece of paper that would hand them the keys to everything I had built. They thought I was old. They thought I was weak. They thought the threat of losing Miles would break me the way rust breaks iron. I looked at Dorothy's photograph. I looked at her gentle eyes and her steady smile. "I made you a promise," I whispered. "I told you I would keep this family together, but I cannot keep it together if keeping it means letting them tear me apart." I picked up my fork and took a bite of the cold roast. It was tasteless. I chewed it anyway. I needed my strength. They fired the first shot. But they forgot who built the engines that won the wars in this city. I reached for my heart medication bottle and set it next to Dorothy's picture. If they wanted a blueprint for destruction, I had spent 38 years drawing them. And mine were always precise. Monday morning in Roland Park smelled like wet leaves and privilege. I parked my pickup truck between a black Porsche Cayenne and a white Tesla with a bumper sticker that read, "Kindness is everything." The truck looked like a wound between 2 bandages. Old paint, dented fender, Exhaust pipe held on with a clamp I had fabricated myself in the garage. But I did not care what the other vehicles looked like. I cared about the 7-year-old boy who would come running through that gate in 4 minutes with a backpack bouncing on his shoulders and a grin wide enough to fill every empty room in my house. Tuesdays were my regular days with Miles. But this was Monday. I came a day early because something in my gut told me to. The same instinct that used to tell me when a bearing was about to seize on the line. The feeling of metal about to fail. I stepped out of the truck and walked toward the school gate. The autumn air was sharp against my face. I adjusted my tinted glasses against the bright morning light and joined the line of parents waiting behind the wrought iron fence. I recognized a few faces. The mother who always smiled at me. The father who once asked me what kind of truck I drove, not with curiosity, but with the quiet confusion of a man who could not understand why someone would choose to drive something old. The bell rang. Children poured out of the double doors like water released from a dam. I scanned the crowd for Miles. I could always spot him by the way he ran, slightly lopsided, one arm pumping harder than the other, just like me when I was young. I saw his teacher, Mrs. Whitfield, standing near the entrance with her clipboard. I raised my hand in greeting. She saw me. I watched her face change. It went from neutral to something tight and cautious, like a door being bolted from the inside. She turned and spoke to a man I did not recognize. A large man in a black polo shirt with the word security embroidered on the chest. He looked at me. Then he walked toward me with a pace that was not aggressive but was not friendly either. "Mr. Carter," he said. His voice was loud. Loud enough for the parents on either side to hear. Loud enough to turn heads. "You need to step back from the gate. You are not authorized to be on the premises." The words hit me like a cold splash of water. I blinked behind my tinted lenses. "I am here for my grandson," I said. "Miles Carter. I pick him up every Tuesday. His mother knows. The school knows." The security guard held up his hand. He pulled a folded paper from his back pocket and opened it. He showed me a list of names. I could see mine near the top. Eugene Carter. But there was a thick black line drawn through it. Next to my name, in handwriting I did not recognize, were 3 words that made my blood turn to ice. Cognitive decline. Erratic. Threat. I stared at those words. My own name crossed out like a mistake on a blueprint. Labeled a threat to my own grandson. I had donated books to this school library. I had built a wooden bookshelf for the kindergarten classroom with my own hands last spring. And now I was a threat. The principal appeared behind the guard. She was a thin woman, with glasses perched on her nose and an expression of practiced regret. "Mr. Carter," she said, "we received a formal request from the child's mother to remove you from the authorized list." She cited concerns about cognitive decline and unpredictable behavior. "I am sure you understand that we must prioritize student safety." I opened my mouth to respond, but the words died in my throat. Because I saw him. Miles. He was walking out the front door with his dinosaur backpack and his lunchbox shaped like a race car, the one I had given him last Christmas. His eyes scanned the crowd the way they always did, searching for the tall man in the tinted glasses. He found me. His face lit up like a bulb filament catching current. "Grandpa!" he yelled. He broke into that lopsided run, arms pumping, feet slapping the pavement. He was coming to me, the way he always came to me. Like I was the safest place in the world. A white Range Rover pulled up to the curb. The door opened and Kristen stepped out. She was wearing oversized sunglasses and a cream-colored coat that probably cost more than my truck. She moved fast. She intercepted Miles 3 steps before he reached the gate. She grabbed his wrist and pulled him back. Hard enough that he stumbled. Miles looked confused. He tried to pull toward me. "Grandpa," he called again. His voice smaller now. Uncertain. Kristen crouched down. She put her hands on his shoulders and whispered something in his ear. I could not hear the words, but I saw the effect. Miles looked at me. The joy in his face crumbled like a sandcastle hit by a wave. His eyes went wide. Scared. He looked at me like I was someone he did not know. Someone he had been told to fear. Kristen stood up. She looked at the other parents who had stopped to watch the scene. She placed a hand on her chest. She shook her head slowly, performing the role of a terrified mother, protecting her child from danger. She picked Miles up and carried him to the Range Rover. He looked at me over her shoulder. His small hand reached out toward me. Then the door closed, and the car pulled away. I stood at the gate with my hand raised in a half-wave that would never be received. The security guard stepped in front of me, blocking my view of the empty curb. "I suggest you leave, Mr. Carter," he said, "before I have to call the police." I turned and walked back to my truck. My legs felt like they were filled with wet concrete. I sat behind the wheel and gripped the steering column with both hands until the shaking stopped. They had done it. In one weekend, they had turned me from a grandfather into a ghost. I drove home through streets I could not see clearly. Not because of my eyes, because of the blur that had nothing to do with color and everything to do with salt water. That evening, my phone buzzed on the side table. I picked it up. It was a text from Terrence. I opened it and my chest seized like a fist had reached inside and squeezed. It was a video, 15 seconds long. Miles was sitting on the floor of an unfamiliar room. His face was red and swollen from crying. He was clutching the toy car I had built for him in my garage, a miniature replica of a 1969 Camaro made from scrap metal and painted silver, because that was the only color I could verify with my own eyes. He was rocking back and forth, holding the car to his chest and saying one word over and over. "Grandpa, Grandpa, Grandpa." Below the video was a single line of text. "You know what to do." I watched the video 3 times. I watched my grandson cry for me while they filmed it instead of comforting him. They had weaponized a 7-year-old boy's tears. They had used his pain as a crowbar to pry open my vault. I set the phone down. I looked at Dorothy's picture on the mantel. They thought his tears would make me sign. They thought breaking his heart would break mine enough to surrender. They were wrong. It did not break me. It hardened me. Because if I signed that paper, I would be teaching Miles that bullies win, that tears are tools, that love is a transaction. I refused to leave him that blueprint. Wednesday came for me before the sun did. 5:45 in the morning. The sky outside was gunmetal gray, that particular shade Baltimore wears in October like a uniform. I was already awake, sitting in my armchair by the front window with a cup of cold coffee, when the pounding started. It was not a knock. A knock has manners. This was a fist against wood with the authority of the state behind it. 3 heavy strikes that shook the doorframe and sent vibrations through floorboards I had sanded myself 30 years ago. I opened the door to a wall of khaki uniform. A Baltimore County Sheriff's deputy stood on my porch. Young, white, crew cut, built like a gym rat. His face was professionally blank. "Eugene Raymond Carter," he said. It was not a question. I nodded. "You are being served." He shoved a thick manila envelope into my hands, turned on his heel, and walked back to the cruiser idling in my driveway. The exhaust plumed white in the cold air. I stood on my porch holding the envelope. Across the street, Mrs. Patterson's blinds shifted. A sliver of light appeared between the slats. Next door, old Mr. Watkins paused on his steps with his newspaper, staring at the cruiser, staring at me. For 40 years, I had been the man this block came to when something needed fixing. I organized the cookouts. I reattached gutters on Widow Henderson's house every spring. Now I was the man with a deputy on his doorstep at dawn. A defendant, a problem. I stepped inside and locked the door. I laid the envelope on the dining table in the exact spot where Kristen had placed her folder 3 days earlier. I put on my high-contrast reading glasses, the thick black frames that sharpened edges between light and dark so I could read fine print despite seeing no color. I opened the seal. Plaintiff: Terrence Dwayne Carter and Kristen Marie Carter. Defendant: Eugene Raymond Carter. Amount claimed: $500,000. The legal theory was breach of fiduciary duty. They claimed that 15 years ago, I had opened a joint bank account with Terrence. That part was true. I opened it when he was 16. I put $200 in it and told him it was his savings account, that I would match every dollar he deposited. I was trying to teach him about patience, about the slow accumulation of value through discipline. Now they claimed the funds in that account, funds I had deposited over 15 years from my own pension, belonged jointly to Terrence. $500,000 of his rightful share. I recognized the strategy. It was sharp. Kristen had been a paralegal trainee before she decided working was beneath her. She knew how to dress theft in the language of justice. I closed the folder. The clock ticked above the kitchen door. I needed my heart medication. 3 pills left in the amber bottle. I needed to refill today. I drove to the pharmacy on Eastern Avenue. Frank, the pharmacist who had known me 20 years, smiled over his bifocals. $397 for a 30-day supply. I slid my debit card into the machine. Declined. Frank looked at the screen. Do you want to try again, Eugene? I tried again. Declined. I pulled out my emergency credit card. Inserted it. Declined. Call authorizer. I knew the way you know an engine is dead before you turn the key. The sound is different. The silence is different. Something fundamental has stopped. I thanked Frank and walked out without my medication. I drove to the ATM 2 blocks away, punched in my PIN with trembling fingers, pressed check balance. Available balance: $0.00. Account status: frozen. Judicial hold. Reference: case number 74193. I stared at the green letters on the black screen. 38 years. Triple shifts. Overtime weekends. Holiday pay. I never spent on holidays. Packing lunches instead of buying them. Driving used trucks instead of leasing new ones. Wearing boots until the soles wore through. All of it frozen behind a court order, signed by a judge who never met me, who only read the lies my son's wife typed onto legal paper. I stood there with $180 in my wallet and a heart that needed $400 worth of medication every month to keep beating. They had not just filed a lawsuit. They had cut off my oxygen. They wanted to suffocate me until I was too weak to fight. I walked back to my truck and sat behind the wheel. I pressed my forehead against the steering column and breathed the way the doctors taught me after the heart episode 2 years ago. Slow. Controlled. Like bleeding a hydraulic line. They froze my life with a single piece of paper. They thought a man with no money and no access would fold like a cheap chair. But they miscalculated. They saw an old man. They did not see the engineer. A man who sees the world in black and white knows one thing better than anyone: the difference between what is real and what is fabricated. And everything they built was fabricated. I pulled out my phone, scrolled through contacts, found the name: Ray Marshall, attorney at law, my oldest friend, the man who stood beside me at Dorothy's funeral, the man who owed me nothing and would give me everything. I pressed call. The pawn shop on Pennsylvania Avenue smelled like copper pennies and broken promises. I had driven past this place 1,000 times in 40 years and never once stepped inside. It was a place for desperate men. Men who had run out of options and were now trading their history for cash. I suppose that made me one of them now. The bell above the door chimed as I walked in. A man behind the counter was examining a saxophone with a jeweler's loop. He did not look up. I waited. The glass cases around me held the debris of other people's lives. Wedding rings. Military medals. Power tools with someone else's initials scratched into the handles. Every item in this shop was a story that ended badly. I reached into the canvas bag I had carried from my truck and pulled out the chrome case. It was heavy, 40 pounds of precision American steel. I set it on the counter and unlatched the lid. Inside, nestled in red foam cutouts, was my snap-on master tool set. Every socket, every wrench, every ratchet head, arranged in perfect order. On the inside of the lid, a brass plate read, Eugene Carter, 30. 8 years of precision. General Motors. Dundalk Assembly. The man behind the counter finally looked up. He let out a low whistle. "That is a nice kit," he said. He ran his fingers over the chrome. "Original? Every piece," I said. 40 years old. Never used outside the plant. He examined 3 pieces, checked the brand stamps, and punched numbers into a calculator. "I can do 800, he said. I shook my head. "I need 1,500. It is worth 4 times that, and you know it." He looked at me. He looked at my tinted glasses and my worn jacket. He saw a man who needed the money more than he needed the tools. 1,200, he said. "Best I can do." 1,500, I repeated. My voice was steady. I had negotiated contracts for 38 years. I was not going to lose one in a pawn shop. Those are aerospace-grade alloys. That set was custom-ordered for senior engineers. You will triple your money the minute you put it in the case. He stared at me for a long moment. Then he opened his register. 1,500, he said. Cash. I watched him count the bills. Each one felt like a piece of my spine being removed. That tool set was the only thing General Motors ever gave me that I cared about. It was proof that I had mattered, that my hands had built something real. But proof does not buy medicine. Proof does not hire lawyers. I took the money and walked out into the gray afternoon without looking back. 2 hours later, I sat across from Ray Marshall in his office on North Charles Street. The room was cluttered with law books and case files stacked on every surface. Ray was 69 years old, bald as a river stone, with eyes that missed nothing. We had met on the assembly line in 1982. He was working summers to pay for law school. I was 26, already 5 years into the job. We bonded over chess during lunch breaks and never stopped. Ray had become a civil rights attorney. He spent 30 years fighting predatory lenders, slumlords, and corporations that poison neighborhoods. He retired 5 years ago, but he still kept his license active. He said it was like keeping a loaded gun in the nightstand. You hope you never need it, but you sleep better knowing it is there. I told him everything. The dinner, the folder, the school, the video of Miles, the lawsuit, the frozen accounts. He listened, without interrupting, his fingers steepled under his chin. When I finished, the silence in the room was thick. Ray leaned forward. "Booker," he said. He always called me by my middle name. "This is not a lawsuit. This is a shakedown. They do not expect to win in court. They expect you to settle. They expect you to be too old, too tired, and too scared of losing Miles to fight back. The frozen accounts are the noose. They want you to feel the rope tightening until you sign whatever they put in front of you." He pulled a yellow legal pad toward him and began writing. "But here is what they do not know," he continued. "You co-signed Terrence's student loans 12 years ago. That means we have legal standing to pull his credit report. We can see exactly where his money is going. And if there is fraud in this deal, and I smell fraud from here, we will find it." Ray looked at me over his reading glasses. "But I need a retainer, Eugene. I can do this at a discount, but the court filing fees alone are going to run close to 1,000. I pulled the envelope of pawn shop cash from my jacket and laid it on his desk. 1,500, I said. "It is everything I have." Ray looked at the money. He looked at me. He pushed 500 back across the desk. "Keep that," he said. "You need to eat. You need your medication. I will work with 1,000. He paused. "We are going to war, Eugene. But smart war. The kind where they do not see the counterattack until the ground is gone from beneath their feet." I nodded. I knew that kind of war. I had spent decades building machines designed to outlast anything thrown at them. Durability was not about strength. It was about knowing which parts could bend and which parts had to hold. My phone buzzed in my pocket as I walked out of Ray's office into the fading October light. A text from Terrence. My chest tightened, expecting another video of Miles. But it was just words. Dad. Meet me tomorrow. Eastern Avenue Diner. 2:00. Just us. No lawyers. I want to fix this. I stared at the screen. Just us. No lawyers. I want to fix this. The words sounded like Terrence, but the strategy smelled like Kristen. She was sending him as bait, dangling reconciliation like a worm on a hook. I typed back one word. Okay, but I was not going as a father hoping for peace. I was going as an engineer, running a diagnostic. I needed to hear what they would say when they thought I was broken. I needed to measure the depth of the hole they were digging. And I needed my phone's voice recorder running in my pocket the entire time. The Eastern Avenue Diner sat between a laundromat and a check-cashing store, the kind of place where working men ate eggs and drank coffee that tasted like motor oil. I had eaten here 100 times during my years at General Motors. The vinyl booths were cracked. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead like trapped insects. It was neutral ground. Public. Safe. Or so I thought. I arrived 15 minutes early. I chose the booth in the back corner, where I could see both the front door and the kitchen exit. I ordered black coffee I could not afford to waste money on, but I needed something in front of me. Something to do with my hands. Before I sat down, I reached into my jacket pocket and pressed record on my phone. The small red light blinked once and disappeared into the fabric. Terrence walked in at 2 on the dot. He was wearing another expensive suit, this one navy with thin pinstripes. He had sunglasses on despite being indoors. He slid into the booth across from me and took them off. His eyes were bloodshot. The skin beneath them was dark and puffy. He looked like a man who had not slept in days. He did not order anything. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a single sheet of paper. He slid it across the table, the way a card dealer slides a losing hand. Dad, he said. His voice was low and strained, the voice of a man reciting lines he had been given. We can end this right now. Sign this. The lawsuit disappears. Your accounts get unfrozen. You get your life back. It is a simple loan guarantee. You do not even have to pay anything unless we default. And we will not default. I have a promotion coming. I looked at the paper. Then I looked at my son. A promotion. He was a warehouse manager at a shipping company that was hemorrhaging clients. There was no promotion. He was repeating what Kristen told him to say. The same way he used to repeat answers from the back of the textbook when he did not do his homework. Terrence, I said, you make $62,000 a year. This mortgage is $9,000 a month. That is more than your entire paycheck. Where do you think the difference is coming from? He opened his mouth, but no sound came out. His eyes shifted to the door. I followed his gaze. Kristen walked in. She was wearing a white blouse and black pants, carrying a latte from the coffee shop next door. She did not sit down. She stood at the end of our booth, towering over both of us, sipping her drink like a queen, surveying 2 servants who were failing to perform. Is he signing? She asked Terrence. Her voice was flat. Bored. Terrence shook his head. He is thinking about it. Kristen set her latte on the table. She leaned down toward me. The scent of her perfume was sharp and chemical. Her eyes were cold and appraising, the way a buyer looks at a car they intend to strip for parts. Let me make this simple for you, Eugene. She spoke slowly, each word placed with surgical precision. You are a 70-year-old colorblind mechanic living in a row house that should have been condemned 10 years ago. You have no wife. You have no friends who matter. You have a pension that is rotting in an account while you eat canned soup and watch television in the dark. We are offering you a chance to be relevant, to matter in your grandson's life, To be part of something bigger than this pathetic little existence you have built for yourself. She said colorblind the way someone says crippled. Like it was a deficiency of character rather than a medical condition. Like it explained everything wrong with me. Like a man who cannot see color, cannot see value, cannot see truth, cannot see through a con artist wearing his daughter-in-law's face. I sat perfectly still. My phone was recording every word. The coffee in my cup trembled slightly from the vibration of my pulse, but my face gave nothing away. 38 years of negotiation had taught me that silence is the most powerful weapon in any room. I am not signing, I said. Not today. Not Friday. Not ever. Kristen straightened up. Something shifted behind her eyes. The pretense of civility fell away like a mask dropped on the floor. What replaced it was something primal and vicious. You think you have a choice, she hissed. She leaned in so close. I could see the individual veins of anger in the whites of her eyes. You have no choice, Eugene. You have no money. You have no access to your grandson. You have no wife to cry to. You are completely alone. And alone old men do not win fights. They get put in homes. They get declared incompetent. They get erased. She grabbed Terrence by the arm and hauled him out of the booth. He went without resistance, without looking at me, without a single word of his own. She stopped at the door and turned back one final time. Sign by Friday, she said. Her voice carried through the entire diner. Heads turned. A waitress froze with a coffee pot in her hand. Or the boy forgets your name. I will scrub you from his memory like you never existed. And trust me, Eugene, a 7-year-old forgets fast. The door swung shut behind them. The diner returned to its low hum of conversation and clinking forks, but the air where they had stood still felt charged. I sat in the booth for 10 minutes without moving. I drank my cold coffee. I pressed stop on the recorder. She called me colorblind like it was an insult. She did not know she had just spoken the one word that would eventually lock her prison cell from the outside. I had her voice. I had her threats. I had the recording of a woman who openly discussed my medical condition as a weakness. And someday, when the time was right, that recording would prove she knew exactly what I could not see. I paid for the coffee with coins from my pocket and drove home as the sun sank below the row houses, painting everything in shades of gray I could actually see. I was tired. My ribs ached from tension. I wanted to sit in my chair and listen to the clock tick and pretend the world was still the one Dorothy and I had built together. I pulled into my driveway at 6:32. Something was wrong. I felt it before I saw it. The air was different. A cold draft where there should have been none. I walked up the porch steps and stopped. My living room window was shattered. A jagged hole in the center, with cracks radiating outward like a frozen spiderweb. Glass fragments glittered on the porch boards. The curtain inside was blowing in the evening breeze. I stepped through the front door. There on my living room floor, surrounded by shards of glass, lay a gray paver stone the size of a fist. Wrapped around it with a rubber band was a piece of lined notebook paper. I picked it up. I unfolded it. Block letters in black marker. Sign or suffer. I stood in my violated home, glass crunching under my boots, cold air pouring through the wound in my wall. They had crossed a line. This was not a lawsuit anymore. This was not a family disagreement. This was a Ziga. And they had just made their second mistake. The first was underestimating me. The second was putting a threat in writing. I walked to the kitchen, pulled a trash bag from under the sink, and started picking up glass. My hands were steady. My mind was clear. They wanted me afraid. They wanted me cowering. But you do not throw rocks at a man who spent 4 decades surrounded by machines that could crush bone. You just remind him what he is built to withstand. Ray's office on North Charles Street smelled like old paper and cold cigar smoke. It reminded me of the back rooms at the Union Hall in the 80s, where deals were made and broken over handshakes and black coffee. Ray was sitting behind his desk, typing with 2 fingers on a keyboard that looked older than some of his case files. The monitor hummed and flickered. I sat across from him nursing a paper cup of water. My ribs were sore from sleeping on the couch because the living room window was boarded up with plywood, and the draft made the bedroom too cold. I had not told Ray about the brick. Not yet. One battle at a time. Ray turned the monitor toward me. I leaned forward, adjusting my high-contrast glasses to read the white text on the dark screen. "I pulled Terrence's credit report this morning," Ray said. His voice was quiet and grave. "The cosign on his student loans gives us legal standing. What I found is worse than I expected." The numbers on the screen were a roadmap of destruction. Terrence earned $62,000 a year. His outflow was triple that. A leased BMW. $1,800 a month. 3 credit cards maxed to their combined limit of $45,000. Monthly minimum payments alone eating a quarter of his take-home pay. Restaurant charges, designer clothing stores, weekend getaways to places I had never heard of. Then I saw Kristen's spending. Employment status: none. Income: 0. Monthly expenditure: north of $8,000. She was burning through money that did not exist, fueling a lifestyle built entirely on debt and delusion. "They are insolvent," Ray said. "If Terrence misses a single paycheck, they are finished. That is why they need your pension. They are not building a future. They are plugging holes in a sinking ship." I nodded slowly. I had suspected this. But suspicion and confirmation are 2 different kinds of pain. Seeing the numbers made it real. My son was drowning, and instead of learning to swim, he was trying to drag me under with him. "But that is not the worst of it," Ray continued. He clicked to a new screen. "Look at the mortgage application for the Harbor East townhouse. The purchase price is $1.3 million. I ran the address through the county assessor's database. Tax assessment came back at $820,000. Recent, comparable sales in that block top out at $850,000. I stared at the numbers. They were overpaying by nearly $500,000. That made no sense. Even a man blinded by love would not pay 50% above market value for a property unless someone was telling him it was worth it. Unless someone was profiting from the inflation. I asked Ray to look up the seller. He navigated to the Maryland Secretary of State Business Registry and typed in the name listed on the purchase agreement. The seller was not an individual. It was a limited liability company. Harbor Prime, LLC. The search results loaded. Harbor Prime, LLC. Registered agent: Dominic Xavier Hale. I felt the name hit me like a wrench dropped from height onto concrete. Dominic Hale. Kristen's father. I had met him once at the wedding. A thick man with a gold watch and a handshake that squeezed too hard. He owned a string of businesses in Fells Point, lending offices. The kind with barred windows and neon signs that said, "Fast cash and no credit check." Predatory lending. Legal loan, sharking dressed in a suit. Ray was already ahead of me. He pulled up Dominic's business filings. 3 LLCs dissolved in the last 2 years. 2 pending lawsuits from former borrowers. A lien from the IRS. And debts. Massive debts owed to private investors and a bank in Delaware. Dominic Hale is underwater, Ray said. He owes more than he owns. His lending businesses are hemorrhaging money because of new state regulations on interest caps. He needs cash. A lot of it. Fast. The picture assembled itself in my mind the way a blueprint unfolds on a drafting table. Line by line, connection by connection, until the full schematic was clear. Dominic sells his own property to his son-in-law for $450,000 more than it is worth. The bank loans Terrence $1.3 million, using my pension as the guarantee. Dominic receives the full inflated sale price. He uses the excess to pay off his debts. Terrence gets a house he cannot afford with structural problems Dominic already knows about. And when Terrence defaults, the bank comes for me. They take my savings, my pension, my home. Dominic walks away clean. But there was one more layer, one more line on the blueprint that made my stomach turn. I pointed at the credit report. Go back, I said. Show me the oldest entry on Terrence's credit file. Ray scrolled down. Past the BMW. Past the credit cards. Past the student loans I had co-signed. All the way to the bottom. And there it was. A personal loan. $80,000. Issued 4.5 years ago by Dominic Hale's company, Fells Point Financial Services. 4.5 years ago. That was 6 months before Terrence met Kristen. The math was simple and devastating. Terrence had borrowed $80,000 from Dominic before he ever knew Kristen existed. He could not repay it. The interest compounded. He was trapped. And then miraculously, Dominic's beautiful daughter appeared in his life. She was charming. She was interested. She did not care that he was a warehouse manager. She made him feel like more than he was. My son did not fall in love. He was collected. Like a debt. The entire marriage was a financial instrument. Kristen was not a wife. She was a lien. She was collateral control, designed to access the one asset Terrence could never reach on his own. My pension. I sat back in the chair. The office was silent, except for the hum of the computer and the distant sound of traffic on Charles Street. I felt nauseous. Not from the betrayal alone, but from the scale of it. The patience of it. 4.5 years of planning. 4.5 years of Kristen playing the role of loving wife, while her father waited like a spider in the center of a web. Ray closed the laptop. He looked at me with eyes that had seen 3 decades of human cruelty in courtrooms and still managed to be shocked. Eugene, he said quietly, this is not a family dispute. This is federal mortgage fraud. Wire fraud. Conspiracy. If we can prove Dominic inflated the price knowingly and intended to use your pension to cover his debts, this is a federal crime. I know, I said. I am going to send this file to my old contacts at the FBI field office, Ray continued. Former colleagues from my prosecution days. They have a white-collar fraud division that handles exactly this kind of scheme. But it will take time. Weeks. Maybe months. I nodded. Time was something I did not have much of. But patience was something I had spent a lifetime building. You do not calibrate a machine by rushing. You do it by measuring, by waiting, by trusting the blueprint. My son did not marry for love. He fell into a trap engineered by a man who saw him as nothing more than a key to a locked vault. And the vault was me. I stood up. I thanked Ray. I walked out into the October cold. The sky was the flat gray of sheet metal. I got into my truck and sat with the engine off for a long time. I was not angry anymore. I was something colder, something more precise. I was an engineer who had finally seen the full schematic of the machine built to destroy him. And I knew exactly where the weak joints were. Dominic Hale's office sat above a check-cashing storefront on Thames Street in Fells Point, iron bars on the windows, a neon sign blinking fast cash in alternating letters, the kind of place that fed on working men's desperation and called it financial services. I had seen 100 of these operations during my union days. Predatory lenders dressed in licenses and letterhead, but running the same mechanics as any loan shark. Give a man money he cannot repay, then own him. I did not knock. I turned the handle and walked in. The office was a performance of wealth. Mahogany desk, leather chairs, framed photographs of Dominic, shaking hands with local politicians. He was sitting behind the desk with a phone to his ear. 62 years old, thick in the chest, silver hair combed tight, and eyes the color of old ice. He saw me and did not flinch. He held up one finger, finished his call, and leaned back. Eugene, he said. I was wondering when you would show up. I did not sit. I pulled the folded printout from my jacket and tossed it onto his desk. Harbor Prime, LLC, I said. Your company. Selling a property assessed at $820,000 for $1.3 million to your own son-in-law, using my pension as guarantee. That is mortgage fraud, Dominic. He did not look surprised. He smiled. The kind of smile a cat gives a mouse that wandered into the wrong room. That is business, Eugene. Market value is whatever two parties agree it is worth. I set the price. Your son agreed. No gun to his head. My son owes you $80,000. I said. He owed you before he ever met your daughter. You loaned him money he could not repay. Then you sent Kristen to collect. Dominic stood and walked to the window overlooking the harbor. Your son is my best client, he said without turning around. He came to me 4 years ago. Gambling debts. Bookies leaning on him. He was shaking in that chair. I gave him the loan. When he could not pay, I offered a solution. He turned to face me. Kristen saw something in Terrence. Call it potential. Call it access. All I asked in return was a small favor. A signature from a man with more money than he could ever spend gathering dust in accounts. He called my 38 years of labor a small favor. I held the heat in my chest. I was not here to fight. I was here to measure. Terrence does not know the house is yours, I said. He does not know the price is inflated. Dominic shrugged. He knows what he needs to know. Your son is a weak man, Eugene. Terrified Kristen will leave him. He will do anything to keep her, even sue his own father. I am going to the authorities, I said. I have the LLC filings. The tax assessment. The math speaks for itself. Dominic stopped smiling. He walked toward me, close enough that I could smell gin beneath expensive cologne. Go ahead. Who will they believe? A licensed businessman with connections, or a 70-year-old colorblind mechanic who cannot read a check without a magnifying glass? He tapped his temple. We are concerned about you, Eugene. Terrence tells us you have been forgetting things. Confused. Aggressive. Showing up at schools unannounced. Sounds like cognitive decline. Early dementia, perhaps. His voice dropped to a whisper. I have friends in the medical community. Doctors who owe me favors. It would not be difficult to find a physician willing to sign an affidavit that you are no longer competent. A judge signs the order. Terrence becomes your legal guardian. He gains access to your accounts, signs whatever needs signing, and you get sent to a facility where someone feeds you pudding and changes your sheets. Is that what you want? I stood 3 feet from this man. This predator in pressed slacks. He was threatening to take my mind, to strip me of my personhood, to steal my money by erasing my identity. I turned and walked out without a word. If I spoke, the words would be fists, and fists would only prove his story right. I walked down the stairs, through the check-cashing lobby, past the iron bars and the neon sign, into October air that smelled like harbor salt and diesel. I gripped the steering wheel until my knuckles ached. He used my disability as a weapon. He thought my broken vision made me broken. He did not understand that my eyes were the one thing that would destroy his scheme. You cannot force a man to sign what he cannot see. And when the time came, I would prove it in front of a judge. My phone buzzed before I could start the engine. An email notification. University of Maryland Medical System. Subject: Security alert. Unauthorized access attempt on your patient portal. IP address traced to Harbor East. They were already hunting. While Dominic distracted me, someone was digging through my medical records, looking for anything to twist into evidence of decline. But unauthorized access to medical records was a federal violation. Another brick in the wall I was building around them. I pulled out a Fells Point and pointed the truck home. They thought I was cornered. An old man with frozen accounts and a broken window. But I had something they could not freeze or shatter. Patience, precision, and a plan assembling itself the way an engine comes together on the line, piece by piece, bolt by bolt. Until the machine was ready to run, I sat at my kitchen table on Thursday evening, and stared at the black rotary phone I had kept since 1986. I kept it because I liked the weight of the receiver, the mechanical click of the dial, a machine that did one thing, and did it well. I closed my eyes and summoned the exhaustion. It was not difficult. The exhaustion was real. The only part that would be performance was the surrender. I needed to become the man they believed I was, the broken mechanic who had finally been crushed. I dialed Terrence's number. He answered on the first ring. "Son," I let my voice crack. "I cannot do this anymore. The lawyers, the frozen accounts. I cannot buy my medication. I just want to see Miles. I just want peace." Silence. Suspicion wrestling with greed. Greed won. "Dad, are you saying what I think you are saying?" "Bring the papers," I whispered. "I will sign. I just want it over." Muffled excitement. Kristen's voice in the background. He came back smooth and warm. "That is the right decision, Dad." 30 minutes. I hung up. I walked to the hallway mirror and stooped my shoulders. Practiced a vacant stare. Then I reached into a paper bag on the hall table. Inside was a pair of thick, black-rimmed reading glasses purchased from an electronics shop in Towson, identical to my high-contrast pair. Same heavy frames. But hidden in the bridge was a high-definition camera and microphone. 4 hours of crystal clarity. I put them on. I did not look like a hunter. I looked like prey. Perfect. I brewed a full pot of coffee and poured it into Dorothy's heavy ceramic carafe. Set it on a trivet in the center of the dining table, 6 inches from where the papers would land. The coffee was scalding. Steam curled from the spout like a slow fuse. 28 minutes later, the doorbell rang. I shuffled to the door, dragging my left leg. Opened it to Terrence and Kristen beaming on my porch. She held a leather portfolio against her chest. He had his hand on her back. The dutiful husband, delivering his master's prize. They swept past me. No greeting, no concern. Just the electric hum of people who smelled money. "Sit down, Eugene," Kristen said. She placed the portfolio on the table with a reverence she had never shown anything in my home. "This will be quick." I lowered myself into the chair, gripping the table edge for balance. Terrence sat beside me and squeezed my shoulder. "I am proud of you, Dad." Kristen unzipped the portfolio. The stack was much thicker than a simple loan guarantee. I squinted through my camera glasses, angling the lens at the pages. "This looks like a lot of paper," I mumbled. "What is all this?" "Standard paperwork." She waved dismissively. "We included a power of attorney, in case your health worsens. Saves us from bothering you with decisions. Power of attorney. Not just the house. The keys to my entire existence." "My eyes are bad," I said. "You have to read it to me." Dorothy always said, "Never sign what you cannot read." She sighed. "Fine." She droned through the legal language in a fast monotone. Asset management. Banking authority. Real estate transfers. I let her talk for 5 minutes. Then, I raised my hand. "Wait. The part about where the money goes. Read that again." "It goes to the seller to clear the property lien," she said. "To the bank?" "No," she snapped. "It goes to my father's company, to clear his books. Your pension pays his outstanding balances. He transfers the property to us. The bank approves the new loan. Everyone benefits. So my money goes straight to your father to pay his debts," I said softly. Kristen slammed the paper flat. Her mask cracked. "Yes, Eugene. He needs the liquidity. Your money fixes his problem. He gives us the house. You are too old to spend it anyway. What difference does it make?" She had just admitted on camera that this was a scheme to funnel my pension to Dominic. Not a house purchase. A bailout. Fraud, in her own voice. "Okay," I said, defeated. "Where do I sign?" She pointed at the signature line. Terrence handed me a pen. I took it in my left hand, shaking. I hovered over the paper. They leaned in, eyes wide, hungry. I let my hand drift left toward the carafe. Reached as if to steady myself. My fingers brushed the handle. Then my arm jerked. A spasm. The carafe tipped. Scalding coffee cascaded across the table. It hit the document's dead center. Paper curled and darkened. Ink bled. The notary seal dissolved into brown mush. The power of attorney became soggy pulp. Kristen screamed. Hot coffee splashed her hands. She jumped back, knocking her chair over. Terrence grabbed at the papers, but they fell apart in his fingers. "You clumsy old fool," she shrieked. "These were the originals. The notary seal is ruined." I held up trembling hands. "Oh, Lord. I am so sorry." My hand just slipped. "We have to reprint everything," Terrence said through clenched teeth. "We will come back tomorrow. And you are going to sign them dry." They stormed out. The door slammed. Silence returned, except for coffee dripping off the table edge. I sat up straight, took off the glasses and set them on the dry side. My hand was perfectly steady. I reached for a towel and wiped the table clean. I had the confession in crystal clarity, the admission of fraud in her voice, and I had destroyed the only notarized originals they possessed. It was not clumsy. It was precision. The same precision that built 10,000 engines on the General Motors line. But I did not celebrate. They would return with new papers, and I did not know that my son would come first. Alone, at 2 a.m, with bourbon on his breath and desperation in his fists. The rain hit the aluminum siding like fistfuls of gravel thrown by an angry sky. 2:07 a.m. I was sitting in my armchair in the dark, watching streetlights bleed through the plywood I had nailed over the broken window. I knew he would come. Kristen would not let him sleep. She would not let him rest until he delivered my signature on a platter. Headlights cut through the darkness. An engine revving too high. Tires screeching on wet pavement as the car skidded into the driveway. A door slammed. Then the pounding started. Not a knock. An assault. I unlocked the deadbolt. The door flew open. Terrence stumbled in, soaking wet. His expensive suit was ruined, dark stains of rain mapping his desperation. He smelled of cheap bourbon and sweat, a scent that transported me back to the worst nights of my own father's drinking years. He did not look at me. He looked past me at the table, where the ruined papers had been hours before. "Where are they?" He slurred, swaying. "Where are the new papers?" Kristen printed them. "She says I cannot come home without your signature." She locked the door. "Dad." She locked me out of my own house. He was shivering. My son. The man I raised to stand tall. Reduced to a trembling mess on my doormat. Terrified of a woman who saw him as nothing more than a delivery mechanism for someone else's money. "Go home, Darius," I said quietly. "Go sleep it off." He laughed. A wet, broken sound that ended in a choke. "We are not done," he shouted. "You owe me. You always owed me. You think working at the factory makes you a saint. You think that pension makes you a father. You were never a father. You were a ghost who came home weekends to sleep." I let him talk. I let the alcohol-fueled accusations wash over me like dirty water over stone. I had heard variations of this speech for 15 years. The absent father, the workaholic, the man who chose machines over his family. It was the story Terrence told himself to justify his failures. The myth that excused everything. But then he said it. "You killed her." He pointed a shaking finger at my chest. "You killed Mom. You let her work herself to death while you were at the factory. You let her heart give out because you were too busy being a hero to strangers. I hate you for that. 10 years I have hated you." The words landed like a sledgehammer to the sternum. For 9 years, I had carried the weight of Dorothy's death in silence. I had let Terrence believe she died of a weak heart, a natural stroke, bad genetics. I took that weight because I wanted to protect him from the truth. I wanted him to remember his mother as a saint. But looking at him now, drunk and vicious, using Dorothy's memory as a weapon to beat me into submission, I realized my protection had been his poison. I had shielded him from consequences his entire life, and each time I shielded him, he grew weaker, more entitled, more dangerous. "You want to know about your mother," I said. My voice was low, flat, a blade sliding from its sheath. Terrence froze. "She did not die of a stroke, Terrence. Not the way you think." I walked to the mantel and touched the small urn that held her ashes. "Do you remember when you were 21? Do you remember the credit cards?" His face went pale beneath the flush of alcohol. "You opened 3 credit cards under her name, her social security number, her signature forged. You ran up $75,000 in debt. Gambling, online poker, sports betting, the same sickness you have now. That is a lie." He whispered. "You came to us crying, saying the collectors were calling, saying they would take the house. I was between jobs. The plant had shut down for retooling. We had no income, but Dorothy would not let them hurt her baby." I turned to face him. She took a night shift cleaning offices downtown, then a weekend job washing dishes at a restaurant on Pratt Street. She worked 18 hours a day for 8 months to pay off your debt. She hid it from me because she knew I would confront you, and confronting you would mean losing you. Terrence was shaking his head, backing toward the wall. Her blood pressure climbed every month. The stress ate her alive. The doctor told her to rest. She would not. She could not, because the debt collectors kept calling. And do you know who the largest creditor was, Terrence? Do you know who held the biggest piece of that $75,000? He stared at me, his mouth open, no sound coming out. "Dominic Hale, your wife's father. He was the one collecting payments on your gambling debt before you ever knew Kristen existed. Your mother paid him until her body broke. Her stroke was not genetics. It was exhaustion. It was grief. It was the weight of a son who never learned to carry his own." "Stop!" Terrence screamed. "You are lying. You are manipulating me. Mom loved me. She would never blame me." "She never blamed you," I said. "That was the problem. Neither did I. We loved you so much we forgot to let you fail. And now, look what that love built." He was not hearing me. The truth was too heavy for the scaffolding of denial he had built around himself. His eyes darted around the room, frantic. They landed on the study door, on the heavy oak desk where I kept my checkbook in the top drawer. He lunged. "Terrence!" I shouted, moving to block him. He shoved past me with the strength of a man running from a fire. He yanked open the desk drawer and grabbed the checkbook. "Give it back," I said. Reaching for his arm, he spun. His face was twisted into something I did not recognize. "Get off me, old man." He shoved me with both hands, full force. The weight of his desperation and bourbon behind it. I lost my footing on the rug. I fell backward. My left side hit the sharp corner of the oak desk. A crack. Not the sound of wood, the sound of bone. A dry snap like a branch under a boot. Pain exploded through my ribcage. White light. No air. I crumpled to the floor, curling around the fire in my chest. Terrence stood over me. For 1 second, horror flickered in his eyes. "Dad," he whispered. His hand reached toward me. Then his phone buzzed. He looked at the screen. Kristen. The horror vanished. Fear replaced it. He looked at the checkbook in his hand. He looked at the desk drawer, still open. "I am sorry, Dad," he muttered. "I have to do this. She will leave me." He stuffed the checkbook into his jacket. He did not check if I was breathing. He did not call for help. He turned and ran into the rain. The front door banged open against the wall. His engine roared and faded into the storm. I lay on the hardwood floor. Rain blew through the plywood gaps. My ribs screamed with every shallow breath. He took my checkbook. He thought he had won something. But those checks were worthless without something no force could take. My eyes. My specific, broken, colorblind eyes. They would write numbers in colored ink on colored paper because they knew I could not read it. And that knowledge, designed as my weakness, would become their confession. I reached for my phone on the desk above me. My fingers found it. I did not call the police. Not yet. I called Ray. It was time to end this. Every breath was a negotiation with pain. 2 cracked ribs turned the simple act of walking into an exercise in controlled suffering. I moved down the center aisle of the Baltimore Circuit Courthouse with the slow, deliberate gait of a man holding himself together through willpower and tape. Ray had offered me a cane. I refused it. I would not look weak. Not today. Not in front of them. 2 weeks had passed since my son left me broken on the floor. 2 weeks of sleeping upright in my armchair because lying down made the ribs grind. 2 weeks of shallow breaths and stubborn healing. Ray had wanted to press assault charges immediately, but I told him to wait. I wanted everything to land at once. I wanted the weight of every crime they committed to crash down on them in a single moment. Precision timing, like an engine firing all cylinders in sequence. I eased into the defendant's chair. The act of sitting sent a white spasm up my spine that blurred my vision. I gripped the table edge and focused. In. Out. Do not let them see you bleed. Ray sat beside me. He was calm on the surface, a granite wall in a charcoal suit, but I could see the tension in his jaw. He had prepared for this trial the way I used to prepare for a complex engine rebuild. Every bolt accounted for. Every gasket measured twice. He was ready. On the other side of the aisle sat the plaintiffs. Terrence was in a suit that looked borrowed. His shoulders hunched, his eyes fixed on the polished wood of the table. He had not looked at me since I entered the room. He could not. The shame was a physical thing radiating off him in waves. But shame does not withdraw a lawsuit. Shame does not undo perjury. Beside him sat Kristen. She had transformed. Gone was the designer clothing and the sharp tongue. She wore a modest gray dress with a white collar. Her hair was pulled back simply. She clutched a tissue in her hand and looked at the jury with wide, frightened eyes. She was performing the role of a devoted wife, terrorized by a dangerous patriarch. It was a masterpiece of deception. Their lawyer, Mr. Voss, sat at the end of the table. He was a man in his 40s with bleached teeth, a spray tan, and a suit that cost more than my truck. He moved with the oily confidence of someone who had learned that the law was not about truth. It was about presentation. I scanned the gallery. 3rd row from the back. On the left side, I found him. Dominic Hale. He was wearing a navy blazer and trying to look like a concerned father-in-law. But I knew why he was really there. He was watching his investment. He was watching to see if his scheme would pay out. The bailiff called the court to order. We stood. My ribs shifted, and I bit the inside of my cheek to keep silent. The Honorable Judge Morrison entered. He was a stern man in his 60s with deep-set eyes that had seen decades of Baltimore's lies. He sat and surveyed both tables over his reading glasses. Mr. Voss stood for his opening statement. He buttoned his jacket and walked toward the jury box with rehearsed grace. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began. His voice was a rich instrument tuned for persuasion. "We are here today because of a tragedy, not an accident. A tragedy of broken trust between a father and his only son." He pointed at me. "This man, Eugene Carter, presents himself as a humble retiree, a victim. But the evidence will show that he is a financial abuser, a man who hoarded wealth not to secure his family's future, but to control them, to manipulate them, to hold them hostage with the promise of money he never intended to share." The lies washed over me like sewage. Voss painted a picture of a bitter, controlling old man who had lured his son back to Baltimore with promises of financial support. He claimed I had begged Terrence to return, had promised to help them purchase a home, had opened a joint account specifically to build their down payment. He claimed I had benefited from their presence, from their care and attention, and then pulled the rug out for sport. He used words like emotional coercion and financial manipulation. He twisted my frugality into cruelty. He twisted my independence into isolation. He made saving money sound like hoarding ammunition. Terrence kept his head down through all of it. He studied his hands. He knew every word was a lie. He knew I had never asked him for anything, but he sat there and let this stranger assassinate my character because the woman beside him held a leash he could not see. Then came the pivot. Voss returned to his table and picked up a single clear plastic sleeve. Inside was a check. He held it by the corner, as if it were sacred. "They claim there was no agreement," he said, his voice dropping to a theatrical whisper. "They claim Mr. Carter never intended to provide the funds. But ladies and gentlemen, we have proof." He walked to the bench. "Your Honor, I would like to enter Plaintiff's Exhibit A into evidence. A check for $500,000 signed by the defendant, Eugene Carter, made payable to Harbor East Title Company." The bailiff took the plastic sleeve and handed it to the judge. Voss put a copy on the overhead projector. The image appeared on the courtroom screen, large and bright. I looked at it through my tinted lenses. The check was printed on security paper with a watermark I could barely detect as a faint gray pattern. The pay-to line was written in what the jury would see as blue ink. The dollar amount, $500,000, was written in what they would see as red ink. The memo line had words in what I assumed was also blue. And at the bottom, in black ink, was a signature. Eugen R. Carter. The jury leaned forward. The signature was steady, confident. The loops were smooth. It looked real. It looked damning. But I was looking at that same screen and seeing something entirely different from everyone else in the room, where they saw red numbers screaming the dollar amount. I saw a faint gray whisper, barely distinguishable from the gray watermark behind it. Where they saw blue words on the pay-to line, I saw shadows melting into shadows. The only thing I could read clearly was the black signature at the bottom. They had designed this check specifically so I could not read it. They had made the critical information invisible to my eyes, and they did not realize that in doing so, they had built their own coffin. Ray leaned toward me under the table. His whisper was barely audible. "Not yet. Let them dig deeper first." I nodded. I sat still. I let the jury believe what they saw, because what they saw was about to become the biggest lie ever told in this courtroom. And I had the proof written in the anatomy of my own broken brain. Ray stood up. He did not rush. He moved the way I remembered him, moving during chess games in the break room at General Motors. Deliberate, patient, every motion calculated 3 steps ahead. "Your Honor," Ray said. "The defense calls Sandra Okafor to the stand." Mr. Voss shot up from his chair. "Objection. Relevance. This is a contract dispute, not a character trial." Judge Morrison looked at Ray over his glasses. "Counselor, what is the relevance of this witness?" "Your Honor," Ray replied calmly, "this witness will establish the context, motivation, and premeditation behind the alleged gift. She will demonstrate that the plaintiffs did not receive a promise. They engineered a scheme." The judge studied Ray for a long moment. Then he waved his hand. "I will allow it. Objection overruled. But stay focused, counselor." The double doors at the back of the courtroom opened. A woman walked in. She was small, perhaps 5'2", wearing a navy blue dress and sensible flat shoes. She held a worn leather folder against her chest with both hands. Her steps were measured, careful, the walk of someone who had spent years trying to be invisible in rooms full of powerful people. Sandra Okafor. She had worked as the office manager for Fells Point Financial Services for 8 years. She had filed Dominic Hale's paperwork. She had answered his phones. She had organized his filing cabinets. And she had listened. Because people like Dominic never noticed the help, they spoke freely in front of the furniture. Sandra took the stand. She swore the oath. Her voice was steady, but soft. She sat down and looked at me. Her eyes held a quiet solidarity. She did not know me personally, but she knew my story. She had heard it discussed like a business transaction over brunch. Ray approached the stand. Mrs. Okafor, please describe your employment with Dominic Hale. I was his office manager for 8 years, Sandra said. I handled loan processing, client files, correspondence. I was terminated 14 months ago. And why were you terminated? Sandra straightened in her chair. I refused to falsify loan documents. Mr. Hale asked me to alter income verification forms for several clients, to inflate their earnings so they would qualify for larger loans. I told him I would not commit fraud. He fired me the next day. Voss was on his feet again. Objection. Hearsay. Disgruntled former employee. Judge Morrison raised an eyebrow. She is testifying to her direct experience, counselor. Overruled. Continue. Ray nodded to Sandra. During your employment, did you ever overhear conversations regarding the defendant, Eugene Carter, or his son Terrence? Sandra looked down at her hands. Then she looked directly at Kristen. Yes. Many times. Please describe a specific conversation. Sandra closed her eyes briefly. It was approximately 3 years ago. A Sunday morning. Mr. Hale and his daughter Kristen were in his office. The door was open. I was organizing files in the reception area. They were discussing Terrence Carter. Ray leaned forward slightly. What did they say about Terrence? Kristen told her father that the timeline was on track. She said Terrence was fully dependent on her now, that he would not make any financial decision without her approval. Mr. Hale asked about the father, about the pension. Kristen said the old man was sitting on over $2 million and living like a hermit. She said it would take 3 years maximum to get access to the funds. The courtroom was silent. Even the air conditioning seemed to hold its breath. Did Kristen use any specific terms to describe Terrence? Ray asked. Yes, Sandra said. She called him a useful idiot. She called him her father's investment. She said he was too afraid of losing her to ever question anything. She laughed about it. They both laughed. I looked at Terrence. He was staring at Sandra with an expression I had never seen on his face. It was not anger. It was the slow, dawning horror of a man hearing his own eulogy. Ray continued. Did you ever hear them discuss the specifics of how they would access Mr. Carter's pension? Sandra opened her leather folder. She pulled out a printed sheet of paper. Yes. Approximately 18 months ago, Mr. Hale sent an email to Kristen from his office computer. I was copied on it by accident. It was meant only for her. When I read it, I saved a copy to my personal drive before Mr. Hale realized the error and deleted it from the server. Ray took the paper and handed it to the bailiff. Your Honor, the defense would like to enter this email as Exhibit D. Judge Morrison nodded. The bailiff placed it on the overhead projector. The email appeared on the courtroom screen. It was short, direct, devastating. From D. Hale. To K. Carter. Subject. Documentation. The body read, the old man is completely colorblind. Confirmed achromatopsia. He cannot read security features on standard checks. Cannot distinguish colored ink from watermark patterns. When we prepare the documentation, make everything colorful. Use red for amounts, blue for payee lines. He will never know what he signed. By the time anyone questions it, the money will be cleared and the trail cold. The words hung on the screen like a guillotine suspended above the plaintiff's table. 8 sentences that proved everything. They knew about my disability. They designed the forged check specifically to exploit it. They planned this months in advance. It was not an opportunistic crime. It was an engineered one. Kristen stood up so fast her chair scraped against the floor with a shriek that made the jurors flinch. Her modest gray dress suddenly looked like a costume falling off a mannequin. Her face was red, twisted, the mask of the meek wife completely shattered. "She is lying," Kristen screamed, pointing at Sandra. She was fired for stealing. Nobody believes a disgruntled maid. She fabricated that email. She is jealous. She wants to destroy my family. Judge Morrison slammed his gavel. "Order. One more outburst, Mrs. Carter, and I will hold you in contempt." Kristen stood there a moment longer, chest heaving, eyes wild. Then she realized what she had done. She had shown the jury exactly who she was. The frightened wife in the gray dress was gone. In her place stood the predator Sandra had described. The woman who called her husband a useful idiot. The woman who laughed while planning to rob an old man. She sank back into her chair. She did not look at the jury. She looked at Terrence. It was not a look of love or concern. It was a command. "Fix this." But Terrence was not looking at her. He was staring at the email on the screen. His lips were moving slightly, reading the words over and over. "The old man is completely colorblind. Make everything colorful. He will never know." He pulled his arm away from hers on the table. 2 inches of space. A small movement. But it was a fault line cracking open between them. He was beginning to see. Not the full picture. Not yet. But the first crack of light through the wall she had built around his mind. Ray turned back to me. He gave the smallest nod. The ground was prepared. The next blow would be the killing stroke. But first, they needed to dig their grave 1 shovel deeper. The recess lasted 15 minutes. When the court reconvened, I noticed something had changed at the plaintiff's table. Kristen was sitting closer to Voss now. Terrence had been pushed to the far end. Isolated. During the break, Kristen had passed something to Voss. A manila envelope. Thin. Unremarkable. But the way Voss held it told me everything. He held it the way a man holds a loaded weapon he has just been given permission to fire. Voss called Terrence to the stand. My son walked to the witness box like a condemned man walking to the gallows. His legs moved mechanically. His face was gray. He sat down and gripped the armrests of the chair until his knuckles turned pale. Ray stood for cross-examination first. He approached the stand carrying a single file. "Mr. Carter," Ray began, his voice low and controlled. "You testified earlier that your father promised you $500,000 because he wanted to help his family. You claimed you and your wife are financially stable. Is that correct?" Terrence licked his lips. "Yes, that is correct." Ray opened the file. "Then can you explain why DraftKings has a lien on your wages?" The air left the courtroom. Terrence flinched as if Ray had struck him across the face. "According to these records obtained via subpoena," Ray continued, "you have lost $48,000 betting on professional football in the last 8 months. You have maxed 3 credit cards attempting to chase those losses. Your total unsecured debt exceeds $120,000. You are not buying a house, Mr. Carter. You are trying to stay afloat." "Objection," Voss called. "Irrelevant to the contract claim. Goes to motive, Your Honor," Ray responded. "The witness claims he does not need the money. The evidence shows he is drowning." "Overruled," Judge Morrison said. "Answer the question." Terrence looked at his hands. "I have some debts," he mumbled. "Everyone has debts. Not everyone owes money to bookmakers who charge 30% weekly interest," Ray said. "You lied to your father. You lied to this court. You are not a man seeking a gift. You are a man seeking a bailout." Ray returned to our table. He sat down. He had planted the seed. Now it was time for the other side to water it with poison. Voss stood. He walked to the witness stand carrying the manila envelope Kristen had given him. His demeanor had shifted. He was no longer Terrence's advocate. He was his handler, and the envelope was the leash. "Mr. Carter," Voss said, his voice smooth as oil on water, "we have established that you have debts. We have established financial pressure. But let us return to the central question. He held up the envelope. Your wife has provided the court with additional documentation regarding your employment history. Terrence's eyes locked onto the envelope. Terror flooded his face. He shook his head almost imperceptibly. A silent plea. No, not that. Voss opened it. He pulled out a spreadsheet. It appears to be an inventory discrepancy report from your former employer's warehouse. High-value automotive parts, catalytic converters, electronic modules, items marked as damaged on your shift that were never recovered. Items that appear to have left through the loading dock and were sold to third-party salvage dealers. The courtroom murmured. I felt cold spread through my chest. The total value of missing inventory is $55,000. Voss continued. Almost exactly the amount of your gambling debt at the time of these discrepancies. Your wife discovered these records in your home office. She has not yet reported them to your former employer or to law enforcement. The message was delivered with surgical precision. Kristen was holding a blade to Terrence's throat in open court. Testify correctly, or I send this to the police. Win this case and get the money, or go to prison for embezzlement. She was not his wife. She was his warden. I looked at Kristen. She was watching Terrence with a small, tight smile. The smile of a puppet master, watching the strings pull tight. Voss leaned close to the witness stand. His voice dropped, so the jury had to strain forward to hear. So let us be very clear, Darius. Your Honor, I apologize. Terrence. He corrected himself with a false smile. Let us revisit the question at the heart of this case. Did your father sign that check? Terrence looked at Kristen. She held his gaze. Her chin lifted slightly, an almost invisible nod. Then he looked at me. For one long second, our eyes met across the courtroom. I saw the boy I taught to change a tire in the driveway, the teenager who handed me socket wrenches on Saturday mornings, the young man I drove to his first job interview. All those years of love and labor compressed into a single moment of eye contact. And then I watched the fear swallow it all. He was weak. He had always been weak. Not because I failed him, but because I never let him practice being strong. He looked at the jury. His voice came out flat. Dead. Like a machine running without oil. Yes, he said. My father signed that check. I was there. I watched him read the amount clearly. He held it up to the light. He said the numbers out loud. $500,000. He told me it was a gift. He wanted us to have a better life. The lie hung in the air. Thick and toxic. He had just committed perjury. He had just told a jury that I read red numbers on blue paper. Numbers that did not exist in my world. Colors I had not seen in 28 years. Ray squeezed my arm beneath the table. His whisper was barely a breath. He just sealed it. The trap is set. I looked at my son slumped in the witness chair. He looked like a man who had just signed away his soul at a discount. He would not meet my eyes again. He stared at the floor, waiting for lightning or mercy, whichever came first. I felt the last thread between us stretch to its breaking point. The cord made of blood and memory and hope. It had not snapped yet, but it was thinner than a hair, and the next hour would determine whether it held or severed forever. Ray Marshall stood up. He did not hurry. He moved with the precision of a man who had waited 2 weeks for this exact moment and refused to waste it with haste. He walked to the center of the courtroom floor and stood there, alone, holding nothing. No file, no paper. Just his voice and 30 years of trial experience. Your Honor, Ray said, I would like to recall the defendant, Eugene Carter, for a brief demonstration. Judge Morrison nodded. I stood. The ribs protested, but I ignored them. I walked to the witness stand and sat down. I had already been sworn in. I folded my hands in my lap and looked at Ray. Mr. Carter, Ray said. He gestured toward the screen where the check was still projected. Large. Bright. Damning. Please read the dollar amount written on this check. I looked at the screen. I looked at it the way I had looked at the world for 28 years. The security paper was a field of gray. The watermark was a slightly darker gray pattern beneath the surface. And where the jury saw bold red numbers screaming $500,000, I saw nothing. A faint shadow. A whisper of contrast. So slight it could have been a smudge on the screen or a trick of the light. I cannot read it, Your Honor, I said. My voice was clear and steady. I cannot see the amount. Mr. Voss jumped to his feet. Objection. He is clearly pretending. The amount is written in large, bold print. Any person with functioning eyes can read it. Ray held up a hand. Your Honor, with the court's permission, I would like to conduct a simple visual test to demonstrate the defendant's claim. Judge Morrison leaned forward. He was interested. Proceed. Ray reached into his briefcase and produced 5 laminated cards, each the size of a standard index card. He approached the witness stand and laid them face down on the railing in front of me. Mr. Carter, Ray said, I am going to turn these cards over one at a time. Please read what is written on each card. He flipped the first card. Black text on white background. I read it immediately. 7,412. Second card. Black text on white. 961. Third card. Ray flipped it. I stared. The card was not blank. I could see shapes, faint gray suggestions of letters and numbers, but they dissolved into the background, like smoke into fog. I cannot read this one, I said. Fourth card. Same result. Shapes without definition. Gray on gray. I shook my head. Fifth card. Black text on white. I read it. 233. Ray turned to the jury. Cards 1, 2, and 5 were printed in black ink on white paper. Mr. Carter read them instantly. Cards 3 and 4 were printed in red and blue ink respectively on colored backgrounds. He could not read them at all. He paused. Because Eugene Carter has not seen a single color in 28 years, Ray walked back to his briefcase. He pulled out a medical file. Your Honor, the defense calls Dr. Anand Patel, neuro-ophthalmologist, at Johns Hopkins Medical Center. A man in a gray suit entered from the witness waiting room. He was slight, precise, with the calm authority of someone who spent his career explaining the invisible. He took the stand. Dr. Patel, Ray said, please describe Mr. Carter's visual condition. Dr. Patel spoke clearly. Mr. Carter suffers from complete cerebral achromatopsia. It is the total inability to perceive color. His condition resulted from a traumatic brain injury sustained in an industrial accident at the General Motors assembly plant in Dundalk, Maryland in 1998. A hydraulic arm struck him in the temporal lobe. The damage to his visual cortex is permanent and irreversible. He sees the world entirely in grayscale. Black, white, and shades of gray. No red, no blue, no green, nothing. Ray pointed at the check on the screen. Doctor, if the dollar amount on this check is written in red ink on a blue-tinted security watermark, would Mr. Carter be able to read it? Absolutely not, Dr. Patel said. Red ink on a blue-patterned background would appear as nearly identical shades of gray to someone with complete achromatopsia. The numbers would be functionally invisible to him. He could not have read them. He could not have known what amount was written there. Ray turned back to the screen. He pressed a button on the laptop. The email appeared beside the check. Dominic Hale's words glowed in the fluorescent light. The old man is completely colorblind. Make everything colorful. He will never know what he signed. Ray let the silence hold for 5 full seconds. Then he turned to Judge Morrison. Your Honor, the plaintiff's own architect designed this check to be unreadable by the defendant. They knew about his disability. They exploited it deliberately. And then they put their son on the witness stand to testify that his father read this check clearly and said the numbers out loud. Ray turned to Terrence. Mr. Carter, you testified under oath that your father held this check to the light, that he read the amount, that he said $500,000 out loud. Red numbers he cannot see. On blue paper he cannot distinguish from blank white. Terrence was staring at me. His mouth was open. No sound came out. He was looking at my tinted glasses. The glasses I had worn every day for 28 years. The glasses he had never once asked about. The disability he had forgotten because he had stopped paying attention to his father long before he stopped loving him. I reached up and removed my tinted lenses. I set them on the witness stand railing. I looked at the jury with my naked eyes. They were ordinary eyes. Brown. Clear. They looked like any other eyes. But the world they showed me was a world without color. A world of shadow and light. Truth and lies. For 28 years, I said, my voice carrying in the silent room, I have seen the world in black and white. I learned to live with it. I learned to work with it. I never asked for pity. I wore these glasses because the light hurts, and because I did not want to be defined by what I lost. Most people forgot. My own son forgot. Because he stopped looking at me a long time ago. Judge Morrison turned to Terrence. His face was stone. Mr. Carter, the judge said, you testified that your father read red numbers on blue paper. You testified he spoke them aloud. Do you wish to revise your testimony? Terrence opened his mouth. Closed it. Opened it again. Nothing came out. He looked at Kristen. She was not looking at him. Her face was buried in her hands. She knew it was over. The judge did not wait for an answer. He turned to the bailiff. Secure the courtroom doors. Then the double doors at the back swung open. 4 figures walked in, wearing dark blue windbreakers. 3 yellow letters on their backs caught the overhead light. FBI. 3 letters. FBI. They carried more weight than any gavel ever could. The 4 agents walked down the center aisle in formation. 2 men. 2 women. Dark blue windbreakers over white shirts. Badges clipped to their belts. Faces professionally blank. They moved past the bar that separated the gallery from the well of the court without hesitation. Without asking permission. Federal authority does not ask. Ray leaned toward me. His whisper was barely a breath against the chaos beginning to unfold. I sent the file on Harbor Prime LLC to my old contacts at the Bureau 3 weeks ago. Wire fraud. Mortgage fraud. Interstate conspiracy. They have been building the case in parallel. The lead agent, a tall woman with close-cropped hair and the posture of someone who had served in the military, walked directly to the plaintiff's table. She did not look at Terrence. She looked at Kristen. Kristen Marie Carter, the agent said. Her voice was flat and professional. The voice of a woman who had said these words 100 times and would say them 100 more. And Dominic Xavier Hale. I turned my head. Dominic had been sitting in the 3rd row of the gallery. He was already on his feet, already calculating escape routes. His eyes darted to the side exit, but another agent was standing there. Arms crossed, blocking the path. Dominic Hale, the lead agent repeated, louder now. You are both under arrest for conspiracy to commit wire fraud, federal mortgage fraud, and exploitation of a disabled person under Title 18 of the United States Code. Kristen erupted. The modest gray dress, the tissue, the frightened eyes, all of it burned away in an instant. What replaced it was raw and ugly. A cornered animal baring its teeth. You cannot arrest me, she screamed. She stood up so fast the chair toppled behind her. Do you know who my father is? This is a family matter. This is a civil dispute. You have no jurisdiction. The agent did not flinch. She took Kristen's wrist firmly and pulled it behind her back. We know exactly who your father is, ma'am. We have the wire transfers from Harbor Prime LLC to 3 offshore accounts. We have the inflated appraisal documents. We have the email instructing you to exploit a disabled man's medical condition to commit fraud. And we have the testimony of your former office manager. The handcuffs clicked shut. One wrist, then the other. Two sharp metallic sounds that silenced the courtroom murmur like a switch thrown. Dominic made his move. He tried to push past the spectators in his row, headed for the main doors. But the second agent was faster. He caught Dominic by the elbow and spun him around with practiced efficiency. "This is a mistake," Dominic shouted. His face was red. Veins pulsed in his temple. "I am a businessman. I have rights. I demand to call my attorney." The agent cuffed him without a word. Dominic's bluster deflated the moment cold steel touched his wrists. He sagged. The predator from Fells Point was gone. In his place was a 62-year-old man who had finally been caught. Then the turning began. Kristen twisted in the agent's grip to face Terrence. Her mask was gone. There was no more wife, no more partner, only a rat, trying to escape a sinking ship by climbing on top of the nearest body. "This is his fault," she screamed. "He forged the check. He stole from his job. He told me his father would pay. I am a victim here. He manipulated me. He said he could handle it." Terrence stared at her. The bourbon fog that had clouded his judgment for 4 years evaporated in the span of 3 seconds. He saw her. Not the woman he had worshipped. Not the woman he had betrayed his father for. He saw the creature that had called him a useful idiot in her father's office while a housekeeper polished the silver. "You told me to do it," Terrence shouted back. His voice cracked with disbelief and rising horror. "You printed the check. You told me which ink to use. You said if I did not get the money, you would take Miles and disappear. You made me." Dominic joined the chorus. "Stupid girl." He spat at Kristen as the agent marched him toward the aisle. "I told you to keep it clean. I told you the documentation had to be perfect. You insisted on using the son. You said he was controllable. You ruined everything." "Shut up, Dad," Kristen shrieked back. "You are the one who owes money to half of Baltimore. You used me to clean up your mess. This was your plan from the beginning." They were devouring each other. The family that had united in their contempt for me, that had looked at my row house and my pickup truck with such disdain, was tearing itself apart with teeth and claws. Every alliance was a lie. Every loyalty was conditional. And when the conditions changed, the love evaporated like water on a hot engine block. Judge Morrison slammed his gavel 3 times. The sound echoed off the mahogany walls like gunshots. "Order. Order. In this courtroom." He turned his fury to Terrence. "Mr. Carter, you have committed perjury in open court. You testified that your father read a document that is physically impossible for him to read. I am holding you in direct criminal contempt and remanding you to custody, pending referral to the district attorney." The bailiff moved toward Terrence. My son did not resist. He had no resistance left. He held out his wrists, and the cuffs went on with that same metallic clicking. He stood in the witness box in his borrowed suit with steel on his wrists and looked at me. "Dad," he whispered. One word. The word he had said 1,000 times as a child. When he scraped his knee. When he had a nightmare. When he needed the world to be safe again. "Dad." I did not speak. I sat at the defense table and looked at him. I looked at the man I had raised. The man I had sacrificed for. The man who had shoved me into a desk and left me bleeding. The man who had lied under oath to steal my life. I looked for my son in his eyes. Nobody was home. The bailiff led him through the side door. Kristen was marched up the aisle screaming. Dominic shuffled behind her in silence, his expensive blazer wrinkled, his dignity gone. The courtroom emptied slowly. Spectators whispered. "Mr." Voss gathered his briefcase and slipped out a side entrance without looking back. Ray closed his file. He placed a hand on my shoulder. "It is done, Eugene," he said softly. "It is over." I looked at the empty witness chair. I looked at the plaintiff's table, where 3 lives had just imploded. I looked at the check still glowing on the screen. Red numbers I could not see. Blue words I could not read. A forgery designed for my blindness that had become a mirror, reflecting their own darkness. "It is done," I agreed. I stood up slowly. The ribs ached, but the pain felt distant now. A memory of a wound already healing. I buttoned my jacket. I walked out of the courtroom, past the reporters in the hallway, past the cameras, into the gray Baltimore afternoon. The air smelled like rain and harbor salt. October was fading into November. I stood on the courthouse steps and breathed. One deep breath that cost me nothing for the first time in weeks. I was alone, but I was free. And freedom tasted like engine grease and cold medicine. Bitter. Real. Mine. Ray Marshall stood slowly from the defense table, and in that deliberate motion, I saw 30 years of courtroom experience compressed into a single gesture. He buttoned his jacket with one hand, adjusted his reading glasses with the other, and turned toward Judge Morrison with the calm of a man who had already won but wanted the world to watch the proof unfold. "Your Honor," Ray said, his voice carrying without strain, "the defense recalls Eugene Marcus Carter to the stand for a brief demonstration." I rose from my seat. My cracked ribs screamed beneath the compression wrap, but I kept my face still, the way Dorothy had taught me during those long nights after the accident. Show them nothing, until it is time to show them everything. The bailiff opened the gate. I placed my left hand on the Bible, confirmed my oath still held, and settled into the witness chair. The leather was warm from Terrence's body. My son had sat here 20 minutes earlier, and sworn under oath that he watched me read the amount on that check aloud. $500,000. He said I spoke those words clearly, confidently, without hesitation. Now, Ray would prove that was impossible. Ray lifted a remote control and clicked. The projector hummed, and the image of Exhibit A filled the screen behind me. I did not need to turn around. I had stared at that check for weeks in Ray's office, and every time it looked the same to me. A rectangle of medium gray paper covered in lines of varying darkness, some visible, some vanishing into the background like fog dissolving into fog. "Mr. Carter," Ray began, "please look at the screen and tell the court what dollar amount appears on that check." I turned. The courtroom was silent. 12 jurors leaned forward. I studied the image the way I had studied engine schematics for 38 years, searching for contrast, for edges, for any clue. The pay-to line was a dark stroke against a lighter field, barely legible. But the amount line, where the numbers should have shouted their value, was a whisper, a breath of gray against gray. I could see shapes, perhaps curves, perhaps straight lines, but nothing that resolved into a number. "I cannot read it," I said. "I see marks, but I cannot distinguish the figures from the background." A murmur passed through the gallery like wind through dry leaves. Ray nodded, unsurprised. "Your Honor, with the court's permission, I would like to conduct a brief visual demonstration." Judge Morrison adjusted her glasses. "Proceed, counselor." Ray produced 5 laminated cards, each the size of a dinner plate. He held the first one up. Black ink, white background. The number read $7,412. I said so. He held the second. Black ink, white card, $961. I read it clearly. The third, $233. No difficulty. Then Ray held up the fourth card. I stared at it. The background was a soft blue, the kind Dorothy used to call powder blue, though to me, it was simply a particular shade of gray, and the numbers were printed in what Ray had told me was red ink. To me, they did not exist. The card appeared blank, except for a faint, shimmering disturbance, like heat rising from summer asphalt. "I cannot see any numbers," I said. The fifth card, same result. Blue background, red numbers. Invisible. Ray set the cards down and turned to the jury. Ladies and gentlemen, what Mr. Carter is demonstrating is not theater. It is the documented result of a traumatic brain injury sustained on November 14, 1998, at the General Motors Allison Park assembly plant, when a hydraulic press malfunctioned and struck Mr. Carter in the occipital region of his skull. He clicked the remote again. A medical image appeared. An MRI scan showing damage to the visual cortex. The defense calls Dr. Anand Patel, neuro-ophthalmologist, at the Johns Hopkins Wilmer Eye Institute. Dr. Patel took the stand. He was a small man with precise hands and a voice calibrated for clarity. He explained that my condition was called cerebral achromatopsia, a complete inability to perceive color caused by damage to the V4 area of the visual cortex. He distinguished it from the common genetic color blindness. Mine was total, absolute. I saw the world in shades of gray, like a photograph from 1942. In Mr. Carter's perception, Dr. Patel said, pointing to the projected check, the red ink numerals printed on this blue-tinted security paper would produce virtually zero luminance contrast. The numbers are, for all practical purposes, invisible to him. Ray let the silence do its work. Then he clicked the remote one final time. An email appeared on screen. The jury had seen it before in Sandra Okafor's testimony. But now, it carried new weight. From Dominic Hale to Kristen Carter. 6 words that sealed everything. Make the check colorful. He will never know. Ray turned to the jury. The plaintiff's own family designed this check to exploit a 69-year-old disabled man's brain injury. They printed the amount in red ink on blue paper because they knew. They documented in writing that they knew he could never read it. And then they brought their father to this courtroom and swore under oath that he read it aloud. Ray looked at Terrence. My son sat frozen at the plaintiff's table, his jaw slightly open, his eyes fixed on the projected email. I watched him calculate. He had testified that I read the check aloud. Dr. Patel had just proven that was medically impossible. The email proved the deception was premeditated. Mr. Terrence Carter, Ray said quietly, testified under oath that his father read this check clearly. The court now has medical evidence that this is a physical impossibility. The court has documentary evidence that the plaintiffs knew it was impossible. I leave it to this court and to the Federal Bureau of Investigation to determine the appropriate response to perjury in a federal proceeding. Judge Morrison's gavel came down once. The court will take a 15-minute recess. But before anyone could stand, the double doors at the back of the courtroom opened. 2 women and 2 men walked in, each wearing dark blue windbreakers with 3 yellow letters across the chest. They moved without hurry but with absolute purpose, the way a hydraulic press descends. Steady, inevitable, and final. I looked at my son. He was still staring at the screen. And for the first time since that Saturday dinner 9 weeks ago, I saw something in his face that was not anger, not greed, not performance. It was the slow, terrible recognition of a man watching the floor give way beneath him, reaching for something solid, and finding only air. 3 letters on a navy blue windbreaker. That was all it took to turn a civil courtroom into a crime scene. The 4 agents moved down the center aisle with the kind of coordinated silence that told me they had rehearsed this moment, mapped every seat, identified every face before they ever pushed open those oak doors. The lead agent was a woman with short gray hair and shoulders built like bridge cables. She held a folded document in her left hand and her badge in her right, and she did not stop walking until she reached the plaintiff's table. Kristen Marie Carter, she said, and her voice was neither loud nor soft. It was simply final. I am Special Agent Diane Holloway with the Federal Bureau of Investigation. You are under arrest for conspiracy to commit wire fraud, federal mortgage fraud, and criminal exploitation of a disabled person. Stand up, please. Kristen did not stand. She gripped the edge of the table with both hands as if the wood could save her, and her mouth opened, but no sound came out for 3 full seconds. Then it came all at once, like a dam splitting. This is insane. I did not do anything. It was him. It was all him. She pointed at Dominic, who sat 4 rows behind her in the gallery. His face, the color of old cement. He made me do it. He said it was legal. He said no one would ever check. The second agent, a tall man with hands the size of engine blocks, moved toward the gallery. Dominic Xavier Hale, FBI. You are under arrest for conspiracy to commit wire fraud, federal mortgage fraud, money laundering, and exploitation of a disabled person. Please stand and place your hands behind your back. Dominic stood. He did not run, though I watched his eyes flicker toward the side, exit the way a cornered dog measures a gap in a fence. But 2 more agents had already positioned themselves there, and Dominic Xavier Hale was not a young man. He was 62 years old with bad knees and worse decisions, and he knew it. He placed his hands behind his back. The cuffs clicked with a sound like a socket wrench, finding its bolt, precise and irreversible. Kristen was still talking. She was standing now because Agent Holloway had placed a firm hand beneath her elbow, and the words poured out of her in a torrent that her attorney, Mr. Voss, was desperately trying to stop. Dominic transferred the wire. The offshore account is his. I never touched the money. Terrence forged the check, not me. I only printed it. He told me what colors to use, because Dominic said the old man could not see them. Mr. Voss put his hand on her shoulder. Kristen, stop talking. Now. But Kristen could not stop. She turned toward Terrence, and her face twisted into something I had never seen on another human being. A mask of pure self-preservation that stripped away every pretense of love, partnership, or loyalty. Tell them, she hissed at my son. Tell them it was your father's idea. Tell them you forced me. Terrence said nothing. He sat with his hands flat on the table, palms down, fingers spread, staring at a point somewhere beyond the courtroom walls. I knew that posture. I had seen it once before, 32 years ago, when he was 5 years old and had broken Dorothy's porcelain vase and sat waiting for the punishment he knew was coming. But he was not 5 years old anymore. He was 34. And the vase he had broken this time could not be glued back together. Judge Morrison's gavel struck 3 times. Order. This court will maintain order. She turned to Agent Holloway. Agent, have you coordinated with the state's attorney regarding the pending civil matter? Yes, Your Honor. The civil complaint filed by Terrence and Kristen Carter is now material evidence in a federal investigation. We request an immediate stay. Granted. Judge Morrison turned her eyes to Terrence. Mr. Terrence Carter, this court has received testimony and medical evidence demonstrating that your earlier statements under oath were physically impossible. I am holding you in contempt of court for perjury. Bailiff, please remand Mr. Carter to custody pending a hearing. The bailiff approached. He was a heavy-set man who had spent the entire trial looking bored, but now his face held something close to pity. He touched Terrence's shoulder. Sir, stand up, please. My son stood. The bailiff produced handcuffs, and as the metal closed around Terrence's wrists, my boy finally looked at me. Across 12 feet of courtroom air, across the plaintiff's table and the defense table and the wreckage of 9 weeks of war, my son's eyes found mine. His lips moved. One word. No sound. Just the shape of it pressed into the air between us. Dad. I did not respond. I could not. My cracked ribs held my breath hostage, and something deeper than bone held my voice. I watched the bailiff lead him through the side door. I watched Kristen being escorted out the main entrance, still talking, still blaming. I watched Dominic shuffle past in handcuffs, his eyes fixed on the floor, refusing to look at his daughter, his son-in-law, or the old mechanic who had outlasted them all. The courtroom emptied slowly, the way a theater empties after a tragedy. Jurors filed out in silence. The stenographer closed her machine. The projection screen went dark, taking with it the image of that check, those invisible red numbers, that blue paper, designed to exploit a broken brain. Ray appeared beside me. He placed his hand on my shoulder, and the weight of it was warm and steady and real. "It is done," he said. I nodded. I looked at the empty plaintiff's table where my son had sat. A single pen lay on its side, uncapped, leaking a small blue stain into the wood grain. Blue, a color I would never see. A color that had nearly cost me everything, and had ultimately saved me because they believed my blindness was weakness when it was, in the end, proof. I stood. My ribs protested. My knees protested louder. But I walked down the center aisle under my own power, pushed open the heavy oak doors, and stepped onto the Baltimore courthouse steps. The afternoon sky was a sheet of uniform gray, which meant it could have been anything. Blue, white, threatening, beautiful. I did not know. I would never know, but I was free. And the air was cold, and the rain had just begun to fall. And I stood there for a long time, letting it wash over me, feeling nothing that could be called victory and nothing that could be called defeat. Only the heavy, exhausted silence of a man who had survived. The Baltimore City Detention Center smelled like bleach and regret. I knew this because the bleach burned my nostrils the moment I passed through the security checkpoint, and the regret followed me down a corridor of painted cinder blocks that might have been green or yellow, or some institutional shade designed to calm violent men. To me, they were simply gray, the same gray as the metal detector I emptied my pockets into, the same gray as the face of the guard who checked my identification and told me visiting hours ended at 3:45. It had been 6 days since the courtroom. 6 days since I watched my son's lips form that single silent word. 6 days of silence in my house on Bel Air Road, where Dorothy's photograph watched me eat breakfast alone, and the kitchen table still held a faint coffee stain from the night I destroyed those documents. Ray had called twice to update me on the federal proceedings. Kristen and Dominic were being held without bail at the federal detention facility in Jessup, their assets frozen, their accounts seized. Kristen had already attempted to negotiate a plea deal, offering testimony against her father in exchange for reduced charges. Dominic's attorney had filed a motion to dismiss, which was denied within 48 hours. The machine of justice ground forward, indifferent and relentless, the way a hydraulic press descends once the trigger is pulled. But Terrence was different. Terrence was held at city level on the contempt charge, awaiting a hearing that could add perjury to his record and convert his situation from days to years. His public defender, a young woman named Rachel Torres, had contacted Ray about the possibility of bail. Ray forwarded the question to me without comment because we both understood that this was not a legal question. It was a question about what remained between a father and a son after the son had tried to destroy the father and failed. I sat in the visiting room at a metal table bolted to the floor. The chair was hard plastic, the kind that makes your lower back ache after 10 minutes. A partition of thick plexiglass divided the room, scarred with scratches, and the ghostly residue of 1,000 palms pressed against it in desperation or farewell. I waited. A clock on the wall ticked with the mechanical precision of a timing belt, each second measured and released without sentiment. The door on the other side opened. A guard led Terrence in. My son wore an orange jumpsuit that hung loose on his frame. He had lost weight. His face was gaunt, the cheekbones sharper than I remembered, and his eyes carried a darkness that was not anger but something older, something heavier. He sat down across from me and placed his hands flat on the metal counter beneath the glass. Palms down, fingers spread. The same posture from the courtroom. Neither of us spoke for a long time. "You look thin," I finally said. "The food is not food," he said. His voice was hoarse, as though he had not used it in days. Perhaps he had not. "It is punishment shaped like a meal." I nodded. I understood punishment shaped like other things. A dinner that was really a demand. A marriage that was really a financial instrument. A grandson used as a weapon. "Miles," I said. "Where is he?" Terrence's jaw tightened. Kristen's mother took him. Bowie, Maryland. I signed temporary custody papers yesterday. He paused. She will not let you see him either. She blames you. She blames me. Everyone blames someone, Dad. That is what these walls teach you in 6 days. Everyone in here has someone else's name in their mouth. The system, the judge, the partner, the father. He looked at me then, and his eyes were wet, but his voice stayed level. I blamed you for 20 years. For working too much. For missing my games. For loving your machines more than your family. For surviving the accident when Mom said you almost died. And then coming home different. Quieter. Grayer. Like part of you stayed in that factory. I absorbed this the way steel absorbs heat. Silently, completely, with no visible change on the surface. He was not wrong about everything. I had worked too much. I had missed games. I had come home from that accident with more than a broken visual cortex. Something in my capacity for easy warmth had been damaged too, compressed under the same hydraulic force that crushed the color from my world. Dorothy had known. She had spent 17 years bridging the gap between my silence and my son's hunger for attention, and when she died, the bridge collapsed. I am not here to argue history, I said. I am here to ask you one question. Terrence waited. Did you know? About the check. About the colors. Did you know I could not read it? The silence that followed was the longest of my life. The clock ticked. A guard coughed somewhere down the corridor. A fluorescent light buzzed overhead, with the irregular rhythm of a failing alternator. Kristen told me it was a standard check. He said slowly. Blue paper, black ink. She said you refused to sign because you were stubborn, not because you could not see. I believed her. He swallowed. But the email, Dominic's email, I saw it on the screen in court, and I knew. I knew she had lied to me. I knew what they had done. And I said nothing, because by then I had already perjured myself, and I was afraid. Afraid of prison. Afraid of you knowing what I had become. I placed my hand against the plexiglass. My palm, with its calluses and its scars, and its 38 years of grease, worked into the creases, pressed flat against the cold surface. Terrence stared at it. He did not raise his hand to meet mine. He simply looked at it the way a man looks at something he has lost and cannot name. Ray can arrange bail, I said. I can post it. But I will not do it. His eyes came up. Not shocked. Not angry. Just empty. You need to sit with this, I said. You need to feel what it means to have your freedom taken by someone else's decision. The way you took mine when you froze my accounts. The way you took Miles from me when you let Kristen file that motion. You need to learn what these walls teach, and I cannot interrupt that lesson. I stood. My ribs ached. My knees protested. The guard on my side glanced at me, checking if I needed help. I did not. I love you, I said. That has not changed. But love without consequences is not love. It is permission. And I am done giving permission. I walked out of the visiting room, through the bleach-scented corridor, past the metal detector, into the parking lot where my truck sat waiting under a gray sky. I did not look back. I started the engine, and it turned over on the first try the way a well-maintained machine always does. Reliable, patient, ready for whatever road comes next.